My father-in-law, Raymond, was the kind of man who remembered exactly how you took your coffee. Not because he was trying to impress you, not because he was playing host, just because he paid attention. 3 years of Sunday dinners, 3 years of early mornings, when I'd drive him to his chemo appointments, and Raymond never once forgot. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, and always the blue mug. The chipped one with the lighthouse on it that his late wife had bought at a Cape Cod gift shop 30 years ago. That detail sounds small, but when you're sitting in a hospital waiting room at 7 in the morning watching someone you love go through something terrible, the small things are everything. I married into the Calloway family 7 years ago. My husband Cole is the youngest of three. His sister Vanessa lives 40 minutes away and calls herself a creative entrepreneur, which from what I can tell means she sells handmade candles on Etsy and asks her dad for money twice a year. His brother Mitchell moved to Phoenix right after college and comes home for Christmas and occasionally Thanksgiving, if the flights aren't too expensive. Raymond paid for those flights, by the way. He never mentioned it to anyone. I only found out because I was the one who helped him manage his bank account after his diagnosis. Diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. Stage 3. We found out on a Tuesday in October. Cole and I had been trying to have a baby. We were knee-deep in fertility treatments, stressed, broke, in the way that young couples doing IVF are broke, and Raymond sat us down at his kitchen table and told us what the oncologist had said. I watched Cole's face go completely still. I reached under the table and held Raymond's hand. That night, after Cole fell asleep, I lay in the dark and made a mental list of everything that needed to happen. Appointments, insurance calls, medication schedules. Someone needed to coordinate with his primary care doctor. Someone needed to make sure he was eating. Someone needed to drive him to treatment every other Thursday because he wasn't allowed to drive himself after the infusion, and his neighborhood doesn't have rideshare coverage that early in the morning. Cole worked construction. Long hours, early starts, union rules about taking personal time. He did what he could. But I was a freelance graphic designer, which meant my schedule had flexibility, and I had a car. And I lived 20 minutes from Raymond's house, so I became that someone. For 26 months, I was in that house more than I was in my own. I'm not saying this to be a martyr. I want to be clear about that. Raymond was not a burden. He was funny and sharp and stubborn in the best possible way. He had opinions about baseball and strong feelings about which diner made the best eggs Benedict in the county, and he used to leave little sticky notes on my steering wheel when I'd forget my water bottle inside. He became one of my favorite people on earth. But Vanessa and Mitchell weren't there to see that. They weren't there for the 6 a.m. drives, or the days he couldn't keep food down, or the afternoon I sat on his bathroom floor with him for 2 hours because the nausea wouldn't let up and he didn't want to be alone. They sent cards. They called on Sundays. Vanessa visited twice, Mitchell once. And slowly, over those 2 years, I noticed something shift in the family. It started with small things. Comments at holiday dinners. Vanessa mentioning just offhandedly that she felt like she was being kept out of the loop on Raymond's care. Mitchell asking Cole, not me, about treatment updates, as if I wasn't the one sitting in the oncologist's office taking notes. A group text that existed that I wasn't part of. I only found out because Raymond mentioned it once, and then immediately looked like he'd said something he wasn't supposed to. I didn't push it. I told myself it was grief. Doing strange things to people. That families under pressure fracture in weird ways. I kept driving Raymond to his appointments. I kept filling his prescriptions. I kept showing up. Raymond had a good response to treatment. By month 18, he was in partial remission. His oncologist was cautiously optimistic. We celebrated with a dinner at his favorite Italian place. The one with the red checkered tablecloths and the tiramisu that comes out in a glass dish, the size of a small bucket. Raymond made a toast. He looked at me when he said it. I thought that was just Raymond being Raymond. Sentimental, a little dramatic, the way fathers-in-law can be when they've been close to something hard and come out the other side. I didn't realize he meant it as something more than a toast. He passed away 14 months later. The lymphoma came back. Aggressive, fast-moving, and Raymond, stubborn and clear-headed to the end, decided he didn't want another round of treatment. He was 68 years old, he said. He'd had a good life. He wanted to spend whatever time he had left at home, comfortable, with the people he loved. I respected that decision. It broke my heart, but I respected it. The last 3 months were hard in a different way than the treatment had been. Hospice came in 3 days a week. The rest of the time, It was me and Cole and a rotating schedule that never quite worked the way we planned it. Vanessa came for 1 week in the second month and cried a lot and reorganized Raymond's kitchen cabinets in a way that made it harder to find anything. Mitchell flew in for the last 10 days. Raymond died on a Wednesday morning in early spring. Cole was holding one hand. I was holding the other. I don't remember much about the days immediately after. I don't remember the funeral home. I remember Cole not sleeping. I remember making more food than anyone could eat and leaving it in the refrigerator in containers labeled with masking tape. I remember Mitchell and Vanessa sitting at Raymond's kitchen table, making calls, and I remember feeling, for the first time in 3 years, like a guest in a house I'd practically lived in. There was an envelope. Raymond had given it to me about 6 weeks before he died, on an afternoon when Mitchell and Vanessa were both out of the house, and it was just the two of us watching an old baseball game on mute, while the hospice nurse did paperwork in the next room. He'd asked me to hand him the box on the nightstand, a small cedar box, the kind you'd find at an antique market, and he'd taken out an envelope with my name on it and held it for a moment before giving it to me. "Don't open this yet," he said. "You'll know when." "Raymond," I said. "I mean it. Not yet." I put it in my coat pocket. I didn't ask questions. That was the thing about Raymond. When he said something a certain way, you knew to trust it. I kept the envelope in the cedar box, which he'd given me along with it, in the drawer of my nightstand for weeks. I thought about it constantly. I almost opened it a dozen times. Then came the estate meeting. I found out about it the way you find out about things in a family like this. Sideways. Accidentally. Cole mentioned it the night before like it was something I already knew. A passing comment about the thing tomorrow at the lawyer's office. And I said, "What thing?" And he looked briefly uncomfortable and said, "Oh, it's just the reading of the will. The estate attorney wants to go over everything." I said, "Of course, what time?" He said it was at 10. He said it like he was bracing for something. I said I'd be ready at 9:30. There was a pause. And then Cole said, quietly, that maybe it would be better if I didn't come. That Vanessa and Mitchell thought it would be less complicated if it was just immediate family. That things were already emotional enough. I felt the words land somewhere in my chest like a stone dropping into still water. "I am immediate family," I said. Cole looked at the floor. He said he knew. He said he was sorry. He said Vanessa had been really insistent. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I told Cole to go. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he left, drinking coffee I didn't taste. And then I got up and got dressed and drove to Raymond's house. I'm not sure exactly what I expected to find. I think I needed to be somewhere that felt like him. I let myself in with the key he'd given me years ago, the one I'd never given back. I walked through the room slowly. The kitchen, where I'd made so many pots of soup. The living room, where we'd watched so many games. The hallway where he kept the photographs, Cole at every age, the grandchildren he'd never gotten to have. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one Raymond always used, and I cried for a while. And then I remembered the envelope. I drove home and got it from the nightstand drawer and opened it sitting at my kitchen table. Inside was a letter, handwritten on Raymond's personal stationery. The kind with his initials embossed at the top that I'd always secretly found a little old-fashioned and charming. He wrote about the day we met, at Cole's and my rehearsal dinner, when I'd spilled red wine down the front of my shirt, and Raymond had quietly handed me his jacket without making a big deal out of it. He wrote that he knew then that I was a person who didn't need the world to notice what she was doing. He wrote about the appointments, the early mornings, the days he'd felt too sick and too scared. And I just sat with him, not trying to fix anything, just there. He wrote that in the hardest years of his life, I had made him feel less alone. He wrote, "You've been more of a daughter to me than I ever expected to have again. Everything I have to give is yours. The lawyer has the details. Trust him." I sat at that table for a long time. Then my phone rang. It was Cole. His voice was strange, kind of flattened, the way voices get when something has happened that doesn't fit neatly into any emotional category you prepared for. He said the lawyer had asked for me. Specifically, by name. He said Vanessa was upset. He said I needed to come. I folded Raymond's letter carefully, put it back in the cedar box, and drove to the attorney's office. When I walked in, the atmosphere was, I don't have a better word for it, complicated. Mitchell was sitting with his arms crossed. Vanessa had clearly been crying, but the kind of crying that has more anger in it than sadness. Cole stood up when I came in and touched my arm. and I could feel him trying to communicate something with that touch. Some combination of "I'm sorry and I didn't know" and "please don't be too angry." The attorney, a calm man in his 50s named Gerald. Not Gerald from anything. Just a man named Gerald who'd clearly done this many times before. Gestured to the empty chair next to Cole and waited until I sat down. He explained that Raymond's estate had been through proper legal preparation, that there was a primary will, executed 14 months prior, and that it was unambiguous. He looked around the room. He said Raymond had left the family home and trust to be sold, with the proceeds split equally between Cole, Vanessa, and Mitchell. He said the investment accounts, roughly $240,000, were similarly divided 3 ways. He listed the other items: the car, certain personal property, a modest amount of cash. Then he paused. He said there was one additional document, a separate directive, signed and notarized, dated 3 months ago. He said it was legally distinct from the will itself. He said Raymond's personal savings account, $63,000, had been designated specifically, by name, to me. He said Raymond had also left me the cedar box formally, in writing, with a note attached to the directive that said simply, "She already has the letter. She'll understand." The room was very quiet. Vanessa broke it first. She said that it wasn't fair, that she was his daughter, that I was, technically, a daughter-in-law, and that family meant something, and that whatever I had done to make Raymond feel guilty or obligated. The attorney interrupted her gently but clearly. He said Raymond had been in full sound mind. He said the directive had been reviewed and witnessed by 2 separate parties. He said he had asked Raymond specifically, on 2 occasions, whether he was acting freely and without pressure, and Raymond had said yes both times and had, in fact, laughed at the question. He said Raymond had written a personal note to accompany the directive, which the attorney then read aloud. I won't repeat it word for word. But Raymond wrote that he had watched his family in the 2 years of his illness, and that what he had witnessed had clarified some things for him. He wrote that love isn't announced, it's demonstrated. He wrote that the person who showed up, not for appearances, not for what she might receive, but simply because she cared, deserved to be acknowledged. He wrote that he hoped his children would find their own ways to understand that. Vanessa was crying again by the end. This time, it was the other kind. Mitchell didn't say anything. He stared at the table. Cole took my hand. The drive home was quiet. Cole apologized, more than once, for what had happened the night before. For being persuaded, for not standing up for me the way he should have. I wasn't angry at him. I was tired and sad, and more than anything, I was missing Raymond, who would have known exactly what to say to make the whole situation feel a little smaller. In the weeks after, the family fractured in the way that families sometimes do after something like this. Vanessa didn't speak to me for 4 months. Mitchell called Cole once to say he didn't hold it against me personally, but that he thought the situation had been handled strangely. They both came to terms with it eventually, in their own time, in their own ways. The money didn't make things better between us. That was never what it was about. I used part of it to pay off the remainder of our IVF debt. I used another part to create a small fund in Raymond's name at the regional cancer center where he'd received treatment. Nothing enormous, just enough to cover gas cards and parking passes for patients who have to drive long distances for treatment. The kind of small logistical burden that sounds trivial until you're the one managing it every other Thursday at 6 in the morning. The rest I put in savings. Raymond was practical about money. He would have wanted me to be too. The cedar box sits on my dresser now. The letter is still inside. There's something I think about sometimes, on the mornings when I'm driving and it's early and the roads are quiet and something about the light looks a certain way. Something Raymond said to me once during one of the bad weeks, when I'd shown up and he looked at me with that particular expression he had, half grateful and half guilty, and said he didn't understand why I kept coming. I told him because he'd handed me his jacket at a rehearsal dinner, without making a big deal out of it. He laughed. He said that was a ridiculous reason. I said it wasn't. I said it was the whole reason. He thought about that for a minute. Then he said, I think you might be the best decision my son ever made. I think about that a lot. I keep showing up for people, not because of what happened, not because of what Raymond left me, but because he reminded me, just by being himself, and by noticing, and by never once forgetting how someone took their coffee. That paying attention is its own kind of love. That's what he gave me. That's what I try to keep. I've thought a lot about what Raymond understood that the rest of us were still figuring out. He was a man who'd lived long enough to know the difference between people who love you loudly and people who love you consistently. And I think somewhere in those 2 years of early mornings and bad weeks and quiet afternoons watching baseball with the sound off, he decided that the second kind deserved to be seen. That's not karma in any mystical sense. It's just cause and effect, played out slowly, the way it usually does. You make choices every day about where you put your energy, your time, your presence. Those choices accumulate. They become a record of who you actually are, separate from what you say about yourself at holiday dinners or in group texts you exclude people from. Raymond watched that record being written for 2 years. He was paying attention the whole time. I didn't show up for him because I was calculating anything. I want to be honest about that. There was no part of me that thought if I drive him to chemo enough times, something good will come back to me. That's not how it worked. I showed up because he was a person I loved and he needed someone. And I was able to be that someone. That's the whole story. And I think that's exactly what Raymond saw, that there was no angle, no performance, just a person doing what felt right, because it was right. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this over the past year, is that integrity is not a strategy. You can't do the right thing as a long game. The moment you start thinking about what you'll get for being good, you've already changed what you're doing into something else. Raymond would have seen through that immediately. He was sharp like that. The hard part, the part I still sit with, is Vanessa. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's someone who made a series of smaller choices over 2 years, each one probably feeling justified in the moment. And those choices added up to a portrait she didn't realize she was painting. She told herself she was keeping the peace. She told herself she was protecting the family. But what she was actually doing, slowly and without noticing, was showing her father exactly who she was when things got difficult. That's the thing about hard seasons. They don't build character so much as they reveal it. I think about the version of myself that almost didn't show up. The version that said, I'm exhausted, I have my own problems. Someone else can handle this Thursday. That version existed. She was real. And I made a different choice. Not because I was trying to be a good person in any grand sense, but because I genuinely could not imagine Raymond sitting alone in that waiting room at 6 in the morning. That's where the real lesson lives, I think. Not in the outcome. Not in the account Raymond left me, or the letter in the cedar box, as much as those things have meant to me. The lesson is smaller than that. It's in the choosing, every ordinary day, to pay attention to the people in front of you. To not require an audience for your kindness. To let your actions be the record, because they always are, whether you intend it or not. Raymond knew that. He lived it. And in the end, he made sure I knew he'd noticed. I keep the cedar box on my dresser. Some mornings I look at it and feel the weight of what it holds. Not the letter exactly, but the fact that someone saw me clearly and said so. That's rarer than money. That's rarer than money. That's rarer than most things. I'm still learning how to carry it,